How do you effectively convince a 19-year-old with a history of depression and anxiety who is on an antidepressant medication that using today's high-potency marijuana is not a good decision? And we could all answer that in a bit of a different way. What do you think? I can talk about how we talk about that with young people. Audrey, do you have anything clinically you'd like to share first?
I do.
Okay.
So a local mom, Cheryl Gould in Lake Forest, has a group called Moms with Tweens and Teens. And she started a podcast that I was on yesterday. And this exact question came up basically was, I know my kid's doing something wrong. How do I convince them that it's wrong? And I said, that's where the parent is going wrong. Because when you believe that you know the answer and you're coming in it with such a straightforward question, it indicates to me that you might be very black and white about how your child's behaving, and they're probably going to get defensive. So I would suggest trying to loosen that up a little bit, whether it be your question to us or your question to your child is, from what I understand, being on an antidepressant and smoking marijuana has more likelihood of symptoms. From what I understand, this is harmful because it affects your brain. The story in my head is that if you continue to do this, you are going to become more depressed, maybe suicidal, maybe you go back to the hospital. The story in my head is that you will go down kind of a dark hole and you won't be able to come out. I feel nervous for you. I feel anxious for myself. I feel sad that you need this. And what more is going on? Tell me more about what's going on. Loosening up the questions, loosening up the perspectives will help you be more curious, and your kid will become less defensive. I've noticed in my practice that the more direct and specific the question is from the parent, the more defensive the kid is. And so that tells me that the kid's feeling backed into a corner because mom and dad know best. So you do know best. You do know the science. I'm not arguing that you know best, but what I'm telling you is realistically working with a 19-year-old, you're not going to get anywhere being so assertive or firm. It requires more of a collaborative conversation because developmentally they're ready to launch into their own world. Whether they really can pull it off is one question, but developmentally their body's moving forward in independence. So you aren't taking care of a 4-year-old anymore. You can't tell them what's logic and expect them to follow logic. 4-year-olds don't follow logic. Forget that. But because I have a 4-year-old who doesn't follow logic, but you can control the younger kids, and your 19-year-old, you're feeling out of control. And to what Andy said last time we talked about is what can you control? You can control your words, you can control your response, be a responder rather than a reactor. So I say, like, a firefighter does not rush into a fire and put out the fire because they're panicked. They really assess the situation and respond and walk in, even if the house is on fire with babies and pets, they're still walking in because they've got their gear, they're in control, they're thoughtful, they're going to get more safety, they're going to get more results by being that way. So as a parent, are you responding or are you reacting? And then also, are you rushing in with the answers and the decisions, or are you opening that up to the 19-year-old and having a collaborative conversation? It's not the most productive, but you're not going into a business meeting to make a decision with someone. Like, you're going into a conversation with a 19-year-old who is probably going to make their own decisions. So you have to lower your expectations of that conversation and have multiple of them and slowly raise the bar, but be careful about how aggressive or assertive you come in with your thoughts or your opinions or even facts. Like, you're right. Whoever asked that question, you're right. And it doesn't matter if you're right. The 19-year-old is still going to start to make their own decisions. Sit alongside them. You're going to long-term get that relationship so that if they do get into trouble, they can come to you. And that's what we're trying to do. I think as parents, it's okay to be one step behind your kid. A lot of times we're told if you're a good parent, you're one step ahead of your kid. And I tell parents that that's not how development works. If you look at Angela Grit, Angela Duckworth, she talks about, like, you have to kind of be one step behind your child so that they can test and trial things and know what works and doesn't work, so that they build grit and resilience. So it's okay to be one step behind your kid and kind of be there for them. don't try to pave the path for them. It's called a snowplow parent, but don't pave that path for them. Be right behind them. Watch out for them, but don't try to make it all easy and okay for them either.
Thanks, Audrey. Somebody shared something that somebody in the group here shared something that works for them that I just want to share with the group. It's not really a question, but just something that they do in their house. This person says, I tell my daughter, who's also a teenager, that with drug use, there are so many decisions that you have to make versus not choosing to use. Things like what kind of drugs, where am I going to get it? How am I going to get money for drugs? Who am I going to use it with, etc. So not using drugs is way easier in that regard because you have less decisions. You know, it's simple, but works for her team. And I think it's a really interesting way to approach it. There's a lot of different, every kid's different, every family's different, but you know your kid. I think it's important to know, even if it's a simple message, what's going to work for them. I echo everything Audrey said and really don't have a whole lot to add. And that's rare when the topic's marijuana. So nicely done.
I'm just winning today. I feel like someone needs
yeah,
to
you are.
You are a cupcake or something.
We might. Nate, anything to add there?
I think Audrey took this one. I don't know that I have anything to add. I mean, I can talk about what we would do with groups of high schoolers in a prevention setting.
Yeah.
As far as a one-on-one like that, yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you mention that? Because I think I would have gone there too. I think that's Nate and I are very aligned in that, and I think there's some knowledge that can be useful to parents there too. So Nate, why don't you just quickly touch on that?
Yeah, so if we're talking with high schoolers in a prevention setting, typically it's a classroom or maybe a couple classrooms combined. And we really address information education first and foremost, and kind of demystifying a lot of the myths that are out there around marijuana. We'll do it in a Q&A format where we'll just ask them, just say, what do you know about marijuana or any of the other substances we talk about? And we hear a lot of the same stuff every time. It's been a while since I've done a Q&A. We've been holed up for 3 months, so I'll see if I can kind of get them out of cold storage here. But the ones that we kind of hear the most are things like marijuana is a medicine, so why can't I use it? And we address that in a couple of ways. First off is challenging the fact it's actually not a medicine. Medicinal marijuana is actually a legal structure, not an approved FDA product. In the same way that it's not the same in that if you were to go to a doctor and get a prescription for just about anything, they write down very specifically what the drug is, what the dosage is, when you're taking it, and you take that into a pharmacy where they give you really no choice in the conversation with your doctor, but they prescribe to you something specifically that you will use. It's been evaluated, approved by the FDA. There are studies on efficacy and effect and whatnot. The sharp contrast to that with medical marijuana is that while it's called medical, all you have to do is walk into a doctor. They'll write a card that basically says you can walk into a dispensary and says nothing else about what happens in that transaction. So individuals can walk in, regardless of the potency of the marijuana, choose it for themselves or with the help of a sales associate, and then walk out with whatever. They can consume it in any way. There's no recommendations on amount. Beyond maybe what the sales associate says, doctors typically don't talk about amount or quantity or dosing. And finally, when we talk about marijuana, I get marijuana in the kind of medicine world, people will say, but doesn't it cure cancer? I've had that written down a couple of times on questions. Marijuana is oftentimes recommended or talked about by people who are going through treatment for cancer, whether that be radiation or chemo treatment. Marijuana doesn't actually reduce cancer in the body, but it helps deal with a lot of the side effects of those really harsh treatments like chemo or radiation. So if someone has no appetite, if someone is feeling lots of pain, if someone can't sleep, marijuana, some of its side effects are all of those things. So people will use it as a palliative aid or something that makes the suffering less suffering. Understandable, makes sense. Now that's not a reason for a young person to use it because they don't have cancer, I assume, at least not in the conversations that we've been having. But just clearing that up can kind of help. We'll also get things, Andy, I'll pass it off to you for the next one. I'll come up with more of my list.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the other things we get in there are like, it's natural, so it must be safe. It's, they'll say things like, it's legal and nothing, there's this misperception that, well, because it's legal now, our legislators have researched it and it must be fine. Well, so are alcohol and tobacco, and we don't say that about those drugs. So I mean, there's a variety of things that students will will write down, and we just try to talk through those, and just, while we said you can't rationalize with a 4-year-old, you sometimes can't rationalize with a teen either. But they're able to rationalize their own thought, and I think that just using their own thought processes and their own words to then talk about what those actually mean, we found to be helpful. There's more we say about that.
The last one that I'll say, we talk about with any substance that we talk about, is challenging the belief that all young people are doing it, or that they will inevitably do it. We hear it from parents, we hear it from educators, we hear it from teens. Everybody's smoking, everyone's vaping, everybody's whatever it is. And the data is just not there for that. It's been tracked for 40 plus years. There's a lot of methodology behind it. I won't go into get into that here. I have kids who challenge me on it, and I say, congratulations, you're an excellent candidate to be a statistician. Go learn how methodology works, because it's thoroughly documented. But with an error of plus or minus 5%, youth usage of marijuana is in the realm of like 10%, have used in the past month. With vaping, it's about 20, 25%. With alcohol, it's in the realm of 25 to 30%. All of those are well below 50. I'm not saying that it's insignificant. I'm not saying that it's something we shouldn't work on, but every time I ask the question, I ask them before I give them the data, I say, what % of high school students do you think have used whatever of those substances in the past month? And routinely my audiences, regardless of age, regardless of profession, regardless of wherever they are, 60, 70, 80, 90% of high school students have used in the past month. And that's just not true. It's 30% at best.
Yeah, that positive social norming piece is really important, because they get those cues from us. Nate, we'll go into a school, we spend a lot of our time when things are more normal and school's in session, and we'll oftentimes get introduced as, hey, this is Andy or Nate from LEAD. They're here to talk to you today because all you guys are vaping, and they're here to get you to stop. Well, that's normalizing use. That's actually an incorrect statement. It's actually a harmful statement, because students who aren't doing it, who are naturally in that audience, are thinking, wow, I must be wrong. I mean, everybody is doing it, and now I'm in the minority, which is not true, and doesn't do us any favors, because we can't stop someone from vaping with a 40-minute presentation anyway. It's part of a greater strategy, for doing prevention education. But so just the way we talk about it as adults actually can help in that regard as well.